we're going to Dr. Mark Pearlmutter. Now, I'm not going to say much of anything about him because we have somebody here who knows him and knows him better than I do. But I will say this: 9/11, Manhattan, 2001, Ground Zero, Shreveport, Louisiana. I believe it was Hurricane Katrina, I believe, 2005. Haiti, the Haitian earthquake of 2010. Dr. Perlmutter was at all of these. Yes, he may be the past president of the International College of Surgeons, and he is the current president, I understand, of the World Surgical Foundation, if I have that right. But that's a lot different than somebody being at every major disaster location somehow. A lot of people are physicians. This man has clearly got the sense of a mission. And he's been on a mission. He's been in a certain location. And I'll let Morgan take over from here and then just do the rest of the introduction.
Hi, so we have Dr. Perlmutter. He's a hand and upper extremity orthopedic surgeon. He is the president of the World Surgical Foundation, and he was the past president of the United States section of the International College of Surgeons. He has served over 40 life-saving missions in the past 30 years in the throes of destruction from natural disasters to actual war zones. And he spent a month in Gaza. His days consisted of 20-hour work days on limited supplies. And I'll pass the floor to you, Dr. Perlmutter, to tell us about your experience there.
Great, thanks very much. What I mentioned earlier offline was that all those experiences that I've had in my life combined didn't exceed what we saw in our first week in Gaza. Just the first week. I personally brought in 700 pounds of medical supplies, partners of mine that I met them all for the first time in my life in Cairo, 2 hours before we drove through the Sinai for 15 hours to get there. But others brought 1,000 pounds of supplies, and all of our literally tons and tons of supplies that we brought with us were gone in the first week. That's how deprived the hospitals were. When we got there, the overwhelming thing that struck us was that the disproportionate density of the patients were children. Gaza's 50% high school kids are younger. Therefore, when a bomb, which is not indiscriminate, drops on a tent city or an apartment building or in a playground or in a mosque, a Catholic church, or even on a synagogue, which existed in the Gaza Strip, it didn't really care who it killed, but certainly 50% of those or more who were killed were at least going to be children. But a disproportionate number were children. And that's because kids can't be bounced around as much. Kids are always concentrated. So the effect of a bomb when it's dropped on a concentrated population like a playground is more effective. And then the timing of the bombing was quite distinct in that it was, although it was all day long, it was really concentrated at the evening prayer and evening dinner. I was there during Ramadan, and the evening meal, iftar, was around 4 o'clock, 4:30-ish. And the drones would start flying with more density over then. The sighting for where the bombs were going to drop was the reason why the drones were there, and the bombs would drop on areas where there were concentrations of people, so their lethal effectiveness was enhanced. And these are 2,000-pound bunker-busting bombs designed for underground, below concrete, 20 feet below the ground, secure bunkers in Afghanistan. Not a collection of tent cities where the same bomb would send shrapnel through 500 tents and through 50 people before it came to rest inside of somebody's chest. The overwhelming thing that we were left with after a couple of days was that this population was being targeted. We saw not a single combatant, not a single person who we could even remotely think was a combatant. We did see people with sniper bullet wounds. I personally saw 2 children that were shot not once by a high velocity bullet round, which has a distinctly different trauma pattern than a pistol round. And it has a distinctly different pattern than a shrapnel from a bomb or the illegal cluster bombs that Israel was dropping, supplied by our taxpayer dollars. I saw 2 children that were shot twice by snipers, not once, but twice. One father described that his kid was pulled out of his hand, not hearing any noises. He just felt him jerked out of his hand, and he looked around, and he was 10 yards away, and he saw him get shot what he thought was the first time in the head, and that was the second time he was shot. The first shot is what knocked him 10 yards away. It was right dead center where I would put my stethoscope. Classic high velocity bullet wound was a small entrance hole. And this kid, who was a toddler, was missing his entire back and all of his chest organs between his shoulder blades. And I saw that twice on the same day. 90% of the children who would come to the ER 10 or 20 minutes after a bombing, 90% of the patients were children. Often 3 or 4 on a gurney at the same time. A third would be dead, a third would be dying, and 10% more would die. All were missing a limb or portions of a limb. All were shredded like paper or burnt like a hot dog that was left ignored on a grill. And because of the paucity of medical supplies deliberately imposed by the Israeli government, we were seeing kids die with 15% body burns, where there is no country in the world where a child would die with 15% body burns. Not even in Honduras, where I go, in very austere environments, does a baby die with 15% body burns. And then for the children with greater degrees of body burns, let's just say I would lose my medical license if I revealed what we had to do to control their pain. The second thing that we noticed, that there was a lack of journalists. And that's why I'm speaking to you today. On the way out of Gaza, to speak to my first point, that the population was being targeted, not only did we see, let me backtrack. On the way into Gaza, through an open Rafah border, we saw what we thought was a wonderful thing. There were probably 2 or 3 miles of trucks side by side, 2 trucks side by side, waiting to get in as we did. You went through a process where you identified with the Israeli government who you were, what road you were going to be on, how long it was going to take you to get there. And if you deviated from that, you were going to get a missile through your windshield. And we were there when the World Central Kitchen vans were bombed. They were deconflicted. They each had 6 or 7 people in it, 6 or 7 cell phones, all of which had a positive green dot on it that said, you have been deconflicted. We know where you're at. We can track you with military grade GPS to within inches. And they had 7 going on in each van. So when that missile went through the hood of each van, it was deliberate. There was no mistaking that who they were and that they were deconflicted, and their entire pathway was tracked out. They never deviated from the same road we were on, that they were bombed on. But on the way out of Rafah, through the Rafah crossing from the European Gaza hospital, which is only about 15 miles into the country and 3 miles from the Israeli border, what we saw were not 3 miles or 2 miles of trucks side by side, a row of 2. We saw 30 miles of trucks, and not 2 by 2. We saw them 8 trucks wide, bumper to bumper. And they had these really bizarre names on them, like CARE and UNHCR and Oxfam and Feed the Children and multiple UN groups and the Red Cross and the Green Crescent. And loads of, and those that weren't marked were clearly overburdened with bananas and pineapples and watermelons and potatoes. And all this fruit was rotting in the sun because Israel would not let them in because they were not deconflict them. So they were deliberately holding water trucks and sanitation equipment and electrical service trucks and generators and food supplies and trucks full of dead chickens. They were not letting them in deliberately to withhold food and medical aid. You combine that with the deliberate bombing of hospitals and clinics and the specific targeting of journalists and doctors and nurses, which were clearly victimized and clearly abused and clearly imprisoned inappropriately. We have patients who were nurses who refused to leave the operating room because they were operating on somebody and they were shot in their knee because they refused to abandon a patient that he was sewing up, taken to Israel with a bullet wound, half of his knee was missing, taken to an Israeli prison, received no medical care, blindfolded, handcuffed, given a juice box a day, sometimes, most times, every other day, dropped at the border on the 45th day of no medical care, maggots coming out of his leg, picked up after he crawled 3 kilometers, just over a mile and a half, if I guess right, in the dirt, naked, not seeing where he's going because his going away present from the Israeli soldier who dropped him off was a rifle butt in his right eye, for which he is now blinded forever. And then I met him when he was brought to the hospital when we were working. So you have a starved, tortured healthcare worker that was deliberately targeted, clearly not Hamas because they let him go. And this is a perfect example of the next topic that I'm thinking about, and that is there's a reason why there were no journalists that were there, and that's because they were also assassinated or imprisoned or had their equipment confiscated. Even Al Jazeera, a respected news agency in the Middle East, they're not even allowed within the Israeli borders right now. So when you create a situation where the free press is not allowed in, and the only place that the press is allowed to go is where the Israeli government takes them, then the truth will never be known. So as we were leaving, we all decided that we had to become the journalists. I'm way out of my normal element speaking to you. This is not where my comfort zone is, but the only way the truth is going to get out is if we say it. I spoke to CNN, and after I told her what I told you, she goes, well, we can't independently confirm that. And I said, no shit, that's the story, that you should be able to confirm this. The fact that you're not allowed in the country is the problem as a journalist. And why aren't you doing backflips protesting that to the Israeli government? You abandon your responsibility as a journalist. And when I spoke to the nice people on CBS Sunday morning, she asked me what the problem was, and I told her that you were the problem. To the lady interviewing me, as a representative of the legacy American media, because you're protecting me from the truth. You're not doing the job that I'm trying to do. She goes, yeah, but it's Sunday morning. We have to be sensitive to what? Right? What better time of the week or hour of the Sunday do you need to tell the truth more than on a Sunday morning? So they put pictures up of the 2 assassinated children. They were so pixelated, it could have been a box of Dunkin' Donuts and nobody would have been able to tell the difference. And so the legacy media is a problem in the United States, largely for the same reason why our elected officials are the same problem, is that they take money from very wealthy conservative Christian groups and from the AIPAC. We don't have term limits. And that makes people's desire to get reelected for money, I think, the problem. Going back to Gaza, the overwhelming opinion of every doctor who was there, ergo every journalist that was there, was that this is a definitive genocide. Israel has 2 choices. They have a 1-state solution. They have a 2-state solution, both of which have failed over decades and decades for the past 75 years. If Israel and therefore the United States, because they're our puppet, we're their puppet. If they were willing to accept it, it would have happened already. So if they don't accept a 1-state solution, they don't accept a 2-state solution, their only other choices are to continue the apartheid state that they've been promulgating for the last 75 years. Gaza was nothing but an open-air prison for 75 years, no different than a supermax prison anywhere else in the world. They couldn't control their own electromagnetic space. They can't go control their ocean that they own. They go 100 yards out into the Mediterranean, they get shot by a gunboat. It was literally an open-air prison. And if you can't continue the apartheid for which South Africa was suing them for, that leaves only one other choice, and that is genocide. And that is exactly what we witnessed. In conclusion, the Palestinians that we saw, the innocent women and children, mostly women and children, most of them that died, were not the collateral damage in Israel's hunt for Hamas. The 1 in 30,000 people in the Gaza Strip that were Hamas fighters. The Palestinian population was not that side effect that was inadvertently hurt. They were the topic of, the focus of the bombing. They are the target of the IDF. That's how you carry out a genocide. That's why the children were targeted. That's why mosques were targeted. That's why all the hospitals were burned and closed. The hospital that I was at, they didn't have to close it. They had a wall around it. They could have put one of my taxpayer bought Bradley fighting vehicles at each of the 4 entrances. They could have put somebody quite clearly on the corner of every hallway and on every floor with with an Uzi. They could have taken care and secured the hospital and continued to provide health care to the population, but instead they chose to close it. They could have ran metal detectors over people. They could have confiscated their SIM cards because they're all Israeli SIM cards. Israel controls the telephone space. And they could have, searched their contacts. And if this was a Hamas player, they would have been able to find out. Plus, they had facial recognition on all of them. So they could have kept the hospitals open, but they chose not to for the same reason that they bombed the water reservoir and the water purification plants and the chicken coops and the museums and every school. The 2 medical schools are now gravel underground. The reason why they did that, because they know that the best way to dehumanize a population is to kill the humans. It's specifically a genocide going on, and our taxpayer dollars are paying for it. That's why I went to Gaza, because I knew it was 50% children, and I knew that my tax dollars were responsible for killing innocent people. And that's why I'm going back.